And we're back, just pretend nothing happened. What you're looking at doing is identifying some ways in which the text talks about some of its major themes or concepts in ways that are less obvious. So an example for this would be what I just demonstrated with Lenina in Huxley's Brave New World. Lenina is not, in fact, a superficial character who's totally indoctrinated and is an example of what not to do. Lenina appears to be that, but is more complex and multi-layered. That would be a way to talk about Huxley's representation of women, for instance, because it's potentially quite problematic in that novel. Lenina is, to an extent, quite objectified and is mistreated, and Linda is an alcoholic and ends up just dying, and there aren't that many other, female representatives in the text, right? So it's kind of a sausage fest, and it would be easy to throw Huxley under the bus for that, and I could see that. I'm totally with you if you want to do that, but there are also ways in which you could go under the surface and say, look, Lenina is more complex than she appears, and that frames Huxley's discussion of human nature in a potentially different way. So you could take the easy way, talk about, use your questions and notes to start to synthesize your evidence, or you can go the harder way, which is to try and immediately be more creative. Start to deploy your own sort of critical nous and say, okay, Huxley appears to be doing X, but he's actually doing Y. Or if he is indeed doing X, the most obvious ways in which he's doing it aren't the only ways in which he's doing it. Then you're immediately talking about the subtext, and that's obviously very impressive because your goal is to demonstrate your understanding of the text. All right. So we're going to synthesize our notes. This is crucial because you're making decisions, you're making executive decisions about the kind of evidence you're going to find important and the kind of evidence you're going to discard. But it's also important because you're going to make the process of managing the evidence possible. There's always going to be too much evidence to hold in your brain at once. So you're helping yourself here by cutting it down. But that means when you write your notes, I highly recommend using colour or some other kind of visual organisation system. So if you are taking down all of the ways in which Huxley is negative about capitalism, say, in the text, you might choose one colour for capitalism. And that helps you see at a glance not just how much cross-reference evidence is available to you, but also where in the novel it is, because presumably you're going to take your notes in sort of page order from page 1 to 300 or so. It'll allow you to see concentrations of references to capitalism, like are there a load that cluster around page 200, for instance? And if you color code your notes, you can see all of this at a glance. And obviously, because you can't talk about everything from the novel, if there are moments in the texts that you're talking about where a particular topic you're interested in is like particularly concentrated, that tells you that you should talk about those moments or that period, that section in the novel more than other periods. So make it easy for yourself, try and color code your notes, try and make them in some way easy for you to apprehend quickly so that you're not searching through your notes all the time for references to capitalism or references to the Holocaust or something. So hopefully you have now done this. You have synthesized your evidence to an extent to possible topics. Now we want to go on to section 2. So step 2 of essay writing is where you start to arrange and plan your evidence. So sometimes this is described as just planning your essay, but I don't like to talk about it in that way because that intrinsically has at its heart the idea that you're doing a kind of theory down reading of the texts at hand. That you've got an idea that Huxley is in fact praising communism and you're just going to demonstrate it. This is usually fatal. You'll get a C or a D probably if you do that a lot of the time. Obviously instead what you want to do is build up from the actual evidence in front of you. So, when you plan your essay, you don't really want to plan it around ideas in your head. You want to plan it around evidence from the text. So, what we're going to do now is we're going to turn those overwhelming notes that have only been synthesized once, that we produced in step 1, and we're going to turn them into material you can actually use to write your essay. We're going to turn it into Anthony Hopkins' script, if you'll forgive me the extended metaphor. So, how do we do this? 2 stages. The first is you discover the kinds of relationships between individual pieces of evidence in the novel. So that's the first stage, is Star Trek Discovery. And then once you have discovered these connections, these links between the evidence you've already synthesized, then you start to more formally select highly important pieces of evidence, moments from the novel, quotations, concepts, whatever you want, and you start to order them. You start to arrange them more formally as they will be in your essay. Okay, so I apologise for those of you with arachnophobia, but now we're going to talk about spiders. So the way to talk about evidence, to discover it, is to draw spider diagrams. I highly recommend this. This isn't the only way to do it, but it's super cool. So what you do is you take one sheet of paper, you know, A4 or A3, whatever, and you put it, I tend to put it in like landscape format. And you know, by now you've probably decided on your topic. If you haven't, you're going to do multiple spider diagrams, right? One for each potential topic that you were exploring in section 1. And the success of those spider diagrams will determine for you probably which essay you write. If it's a particularly long essay, like a 20-page research paper, you might even do 2 spider diagrams. Okay, so what you do is you want lots of little spiders, and you want the spider's legs to be touching. So let's say, again, we're doing Aldous Huxley's Brave New World. And we want to write on the importance of Henry Ford in the text. So here's our big spider body. We're making him big because Ford is obviously important. Henry Ford takes the place of God in Aldous Huxley's text, so obviously important. Now what we want to do is identify moments or ideas in the text that relate to Henry Ford somehow. So obviously over here we've got God. Here's one of our legs. Over here we've got the assembly line. The only assembly line we see in the text is the sort of eugenic genetics assembly line, but it's still an assembly line. Then we've got ideas of human capital. And all that really means is a measurement of a human's worth by their usefulness to economics, like how much can they produce, basically. Over here, you might have some more problematic elements, such as authoritarianism, which I can't fit in here, so I'll just put A. Because Henry Ford, of course, was essentially a dictator within the Ford Motor Company, and was kind of a Nazi apologist. And also, Mustafa Mond controlled, the world controller, controls the world in a remarkably similar way to how Henry Ford ordered his factories, right? Everyone had a particular role that they were only allowed to do, so putting one wheel on the front left of the car all day, for instance. Let's just only allow this spider to have 4 legs for now. Sorry, spider. Now what we want to do is we want to do the sort of second stage of the spider, and that is what themes are connected to these legs. So what themes are connected to God, to authoritarianism, to assembly line factoring, to human capital, whatever you want. So, you know, authoritarianism, I've already done this, but we can go over here to Mustafa Mond, the world controller. God, we can go over here to Soma. Religion is the opiate of the people, as Marx said, so that obviously relates us over here to Marx, which could then link us to Bernard Marx. What does the character have to say about the novel's attitude to Marxism? Assembly line industrialism, we've obviously got this link to consumption, can't spell. Like all the sports they have to play, where they have to buy this complicated equipment that costs money and thus drives the economy. Then down here, obviously, when we think of human capital, we're immediately going to class, the deltas and the epsilons, who are deliberately reduced in intelligence and capability so that they're happy with their jobs. So hopefully you can see what we've done here is we've taken our evidence that was arranged for us on the page in a linear fashion by page number, even if we color-coded it, and didn't have obvious relationships with itself either other than proximity in the text. So if you've got notes from pages 1 to 300, if you've got a really important note on page 50, there's no obvious relation when you look at your own notes between what's on page 50 and anything else, except the stuff that's directly before and after it, and if you're smart enough to have color-coded the other things that are in the same color. But still, if you color-coded around sort of themes, in some ways you might have only done Ford, and you've got a color for Ford. This completely takes your notes out of the linear realm and into the realm of connections, and that's what you want to do. Any piece of evidence you talk about, you want to have it cross-referenced with other moments or other pieces of evidence that are related. And so the extent of complexity of each of these relationships will determine, how much of this you actually want to talk about. So far, I think I haven't done as good a job as the last time I did this. Morgan, what haven't I talked about yet? How much more time do we have?
I don't know if you were talking about how you use the theory of the Hegelian dialectic thing.
Oh yeah, dialectics. Yeah, that's good. I haven't done that at all yet. Yeah. No. All right, let's take a quick break and then we'll do that next.